it's like my oldest son was in the Marines. He was in the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. Went to Afghanistan twice. Made a squad leader as a PFC. He was awarded. He got a Valorous Award for saving his platoon, and he committed suicide after he came back. The stresses that impact you day to day in the military do have an effect on you, and everybody kind of needs to sit back and reflect on that.
Hey everybody, welcome to the program. We are going to go ahead and jump right into it, and I'm going to let this fine gentleman here introduce himself.
Hey everybody, my name's Tom Welch. I'm the owner of Three Guys Garage in Garden City, Georgia. Been doing this since 2011. I'm a disabled veteran, and shout out to everybody who's serving or who has served.
So basically, this is going to be like a breakaway mini series where we try to highlight veterans and give them a chance to share their story and hopefully have some laughs and also share some success. I think it's awesome that you run your own garage. That's aspirational.
Something I really wanted to do. When I got out of the service, I was really, looking for a direction. And, I had a family to take care of, and I just, I was all over the map. I didn't realize I had issues with PTSD and things like that. And it was having a really negative effect, when, the first job I had, there was with a union, and they're evaluating me for union membership, and they start talking about communism without understanding that's what they're talking about, and socialism without understanding that's what they're talking about, and I kind of confront them on it. No, we don't mean it like that, but everybody should be the same. Well, that's what that is. And back and forth, and finally, and they wouldn't accept me for membership in the union. And there was, I think one of the other things that they didn't like was, you had to go to a 4-year training program like you were going to college. I said, well, okay, what if I can finish it in 3 years instead of 4 years? Oh, you can't do that. Why not? And if I'm smart enough to do it, what's wrong with me doing that? No, that ain't right. That ain't fair. They don't let anybody do that. So I don't want anything to do with the union. And that's, people are in unions and they like them and they think they're good things. That's fine. That's what you think. I don't think that. Anyway, I kicked around from job to job. I'd last in a job about 18 months, and then I would quit or get fired. And I had been working at Pep Boys as an assistant service manager, and we were really a really busy store. It's the one in Savannah, Georgia. It's not. I don't know what it's like now because it's been 15 years since I've been there. But my dad and I talked about this. He helped me finance opening the shop, and now I own the property. And, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I've never held a job this long. And it was being able to be my own boss, not having to listen to some knucklehead tell me about some metric that I have to meet, or because I pissed off a customer that I didn't even talk to, they take half of my commission on sales that I've made, which is what Pet Boys would do to people. I was going to quit or get fired from there at some point, and I could feel it coming. And I was able to do this, and we've had our ups and downs, but overall it's been really good. We opened up, like I say, in 2011 when Obama was in the White House. And I spoke to a couple of people that said, man, I wouldn't be doing that now. Not in this, economy and not in this political climate. And I talked to the lady that owns the Hallmark card stores in Savannah. And she had a different perspective. She says, if you can do it now, you'll always be able to. And she was right. She was exactly right.
Do you have any advice for veterans getting out of the service who would like to start their own business?
Yeah, you better have a plan. And when I got out of the service, you know, it was just kind of this hodgepodge stuff. You know, I'm not going to answer that. And, you know, they would try and help you with this, try and help you with that. You know, if you were an 88 Mike or a truck driver for the Army guys, you could easily transition to a job. You could get your CDL and do things like that. I was an infantry soldier. You know, I knew logistics and I knew how to blow things up and kill people and, you know, all those kinds of things that infantry soldiers do. And the Army didn't feel a need for me to be there anymore. I ended up getting a medical discharge. But I had logistics experience that the Army legitimately needed, and they didn't want it. So when Bill Clinton was in the White House, and they had pretty well gutted the military during his first term. And then, you know, so make sure you have a plan. If you want to start your own business, you need to spend some years in that business. Not, I'm going to go to a course or I'm going to read about it, you know.
Yeah.
And you're going to need business plans for dummies, and you need to write a business plan. Don't type it on a computer. Get a spiral notebook and write it in your own writing. I've never had to go back and review it, although they tell you that's a good idea, but I still got it up here. I know what needs to be done. You know, I have, even before I started doing this, I had worked in this industry for, I guess, about 7 or 8 years. I'd worked at Goodyear, Firestone, Midas, Private Shop, and Pep Boys. And now that I'm here running it my way, you know, I'm grounded. I'm not wondering, you know, what's the owner going to do as this gets messed up? Who's going to tell lies about it? Who's going to tell the truth? You know, I'm here. I get to handle all the good and the bad, but I kind of need that, and it works good. You know, we're happy. You know, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. You know, I'm making good money, even though sometimes it is a struggle. But I wouldn't trade it for a job.
You had mentioned your struggle with PTSD.
Yeah.
That I'm assuming comes from your time in service.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What was deploying like for you when you were in? Was that
when I was
experience?
When I was on active duty, there was no real point where I understood that, you know, I'm having issues. You know, I was angry, but, you know, you kind of pissed off all the time in the military anyway about something. And I didn't really realize it until, and I didn't even realize it then. When I got home, and my wife has moved into the quarters at Fort Benning, and with my young son, he was like 3 years old at the time, and we're going to put the bed together, you know, the water bed we have, and I'm looking at him, and I'm looking at my wife, and I'm realizing that nobody can pick this thing up but me, and I just blow up and started yelling, and you know, that was the first indication that something was wrong. I didn't really see it. My wife was very upset about it. Of course, my son, you know, he was too. But and I was kind of like, you know, gee, why'd I do that? And that was about as far as it went. You have to be willing to have somebody to talk to. And the best guy to talk to is a guy who's chewed dirt, been where you are, done the same type of job, spent time in the military, it doesn't really matter what branch of service. It's a lot easier if the guy was infantry for me to talk to, because a guy who was, you know, an Air Force computer tech, you know, dude, you're in air conditioning 24/7, you know? So, you know, there's that difference, and that animosity is really there. When we got back from Desert Storm, we had to, as a group of people, not a unit, but they would just pick like random individuals from the company, and we would go sit down, and there was these two guys there, and they're kind of like, well, how are y'all doing? So I'm doing fine. Why are we here? Well, what do you want to talk about? I want to talk about why the hell I'm here, because I don't want to be here. I want to go home. I want to be with my wife and kid. I don't want to be here. And instead of saying, well, let me tell you about me. Let me tell you my background in the military. These two, like me now, you fat ass. Why, what did you do? You don't know because they don't want to tell you. And they got to be willing to talk to you. I don't care, I met guys, golly, I almost met a Medal of Honor winner when I was at Fort Lewis, Washington. He was a sergeant major, and I saw his license plate was Medal of Honor winner on it. Never actually got to meet him, though. But so many people out there, whether they've done something that extraordinary or if they just put in their time and they got out, the stresses that impact you day to day in the military do have an effect on you. And everybody kind of needs to sit back and reflect on that. Oh, no, I never had any problems. That's not true. You had something happen. Friend of mine, I'm not going to say his name, but he's a retired one-star. And he retired as a one-star deliberately because things were getting to him. Soldier suicide was the thing that was getting to him. And he left the service. He probably could have been a 4-star general. He was one of those guys that just had the personality and the leadership ability and the skills that you just recognize this guy's going places. And it was great to work with him because he would bring out the best in people. And it was weird how he did it. It's not like he, was on you to do better, but he would tell you, okay, I need you to work on this. And you just did. I don't know how he was like that, but he was. And he was a great guy to work for. But you got to find somebody that you can sit there and chew the fat with and talk about your crappy experiences, talk about your good experiences, And it's like my oldest son was in the Marines. He was in the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. Went to Afghanistan twice. Made a squad leader as a PFC, which is something apparently is a routine thing that the Marines do. He was basically built for that type of work. He had the personality, he had the leadership skills, he had the job skills to know what to do and how to do it, and he was awarded. He got a Valorous Award for saving his platoon, and he committed suicide after he came back. He was working for Savannah Fire, doing good, bought his own house, got a decent vehicle, got a girlfriend, and things are kind of moving along, but he's having issues and he doesn't really want to talk about them. That's the problem. Didn't really want to talk about it. Didn't know who to talk to. I was not the guy to talk to because I'm his dad. My father, who passed away while he was deployed, would have been somebody that he could have spoken to. Or somebody who's a veteran that would be able to sit and listen and just let him go off saying whatever. It's one of the things that some of the guys, this whole platoon was at the funeral except for 2 guys who couldn't make it. And more than one of them told me, I sat around with a pistol in my mouth, I was ready to end it. And for one reason or another, they didn't. And, one guy was telling me, I got locked up, couldn't see my kids without supervision. And that's not how to handle this, in my opinion. You got to talk to these guys. You got to get them to open up. And you got to get them to explain to somebody what's going on. What bothers you? What makes it hurt? What gets you, angry? What gets you, upset? What makes you cry? And you don't do it in a group session. You do it in a one-on-one session. To me, that's the best way to do it. And I've had the chance to speak to some of his buddies. And, they all thought the world of my son. And, they said half of them wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for him. And it's a really bad feeling to realize that somebody not just your son, it's bad to realize somebody took their own life. And the hardest part is getting through to them to get them to open up, because they think you're going to want to lock them up. You're going to think I'm crazy. You're going to want to lock me up. You're going to this, you're going to that. And they need somebody to talk to that won't judge any of that. And it's not going to be, some clinical guy sitting in a chair while you lie there on the sofa and talk like you see on TV. That's all a bunch of crap. You got to have somebody that knows the deal, that they can't BS, and who is willing to be real with them. One of the things that my son talked about, and I have actually had an experience with this, well, we can give you some medication. Medication is going to do, well, it'll help you deal with it. Why is it going to help me deal with it? It doesn't solve the problem. It just masks the problem. I'm not interested in that. I have to come to terms with this thing. I have to be able to control it. And that's such a frustrating thing, because the medical community or the therapy community, however you want to look at this, psychologists and so on, they're very quick, in my opinion, to recommend taking some pills. Yeah. Pills don't fix it. This is not a head cold. This is not, antibiotics because I have an infection. This is something that you have to talk through, in my opinion. You have got to talk through it. And I had a chance to talk to some of the guys in Spittoon who were having a rough time, and I'd like to think I helped them a little bit. I haven't spoken to any of them since, and we've never really been in contact with, I haven't been in contact with really any of them. A couple of them we did a few times, and it was always good to talk to them. But most of the guys, they want to, just like I did, you want to go, you want to be away from that, and when you're ready, then you can talk about it. And it's hard to get ready. It's hard to be able to open up to somebody. Like, you and I don't know each other really, but I'm able to talk about it now. Years ago, I wouldn't have talked about it at all.
How did you feel when it first happened?
Kind of bewildered, a little bit, angry at myself, a little, kind of confused about, what's going on, what am I thinking? And, one day I was in my car and I'm driving, and I could feel the devil coming into my head. I mean, this is, I've never told anybody this, but I could feel the devil coming into my head, and I could feel my face changing. And it scared me to the point where I started to pray. And thank God it left. It's never been back. But that stuff's real. Those kinds of tormented feelings and the anguish, the anger, the fear, whatever you want to call it, it's real, and you need to deal with it. You need to talk to somebody. And it's not something that you can keep inside and live a normal life. It just doesn't work. And, anybody that's listening, find somebody to talk to. Find some old guy who's a World War II or Korean War veteran or something, and talk to him. You'll find out that even those guys have a hard time talking about these things. And they've been living with it for how long? You need to talk about it. If you sit there and cry with each other, do it. It helps you so much to do that with somebody that you can relate to, that you can share those things with, and they can tell you their stories, and you can tell them your stories. And there's a group here in Savannah who my wife and I got invited to, and we went to a ceremony, and it's all of the military members. You know, it's kind of a celebration of their lives, and they all took their own lives. And you know, there's wives, there's sons, daughters, husbands. You know, all of these people that are family members and friends. You're left holding an empty bag, and you don't know what to do with it. And you have no way to rationalize this. You know, it just tears you up because I could have helped, but you don't know if you could have helped. You don't know if you had something to do with it. You don't know if you didn't. They're gone by their own hand, and you're left with nothing. And it is one of the most difficult things I've ever had to go through. And, you know, to be able to live through that is horrible. To come out the other side is good, but at the same time, I don't want to see anybody do this kind of thing. I want you to recover, be you, not be the guy who's tormented or the female who's tormented. You have to come to terms with this stuff somehow.
When you were deployed, did you notice you were struggling in country, or
no,
did it only start when you came home?
Didn't really notice it then. Everybody was kind of at odds with each other when you're deployed. You're either, your friends one minute, you're arguing the next minute, and then, all of that kind of goes away when it's time to go. We're crossing the border into Iraq, where we're doing whatever.
And what was that experience like for you?
That was one where everybody quit complaining, everybody quit bitching, everybody quit laughing, nobody's telling jokes, everybody's quiet and focused, and you knew this is the real deal. We watched the B-52 strike. I could barely see the plane through the binoculars that I had. And we crossed the border, and we're driving over sand dunes. I was kind of like, man, I don't know why we're going this way, because vehicles were getting stuck. Not a whole lot of them, but some of them would get stuck. And it got so bad that we were starting to get separated, the whole battalion that I was with, and they had to pop star clusters so that the people in the back of the formation who had become strung out knew which way to go. And we did, and we all got caught up. And the following morning, we turn around and look at these sand dunes, and it's kind of like, man, we went down that thing. It's just like straight up, for a mile almost is what it looked like. And nobody ever thought anybody would be able to do it, but our battalion did it. And I don't know what other battalions did, in relation to that. Because, I was in one armored personnel carrier and, with a handful of guys, and, we were part of a platoon, as part of a company, part of the battalion. And you don't really get to see a whole lot of a big picture when that goes on. So it was interesting. It was an experience that I don't want to have again, but I don't want to not have it. I want to have that in my mind, because as much as it stresses you out and as much as it troubles you later on, when you look at the whole experience, it teaches you how to be a man if you had any issues with that. Because you're going to be, by the time you come through that, you're going to be a man. You might be kind of a hard man, but you will be a man because you have been through some stuff, seen things, smelled things, that are not normal. And it's kind of a defining experience, I guess, is the best way to look at it, especially for people that haven't done it. And, and I've talked to people that, man, I should have signed up, but I never did. And then you see these things where they have this 3-day retreat where, men can figure out what it's like to be a man again. And, and you see these videos of guys standing in formation and yelling and, and kind of looking at us like, what is this? This, you guys had your opportunity and you deliberately avoided it. And now you want to do this and you think this is going to revitalize you? No, you had your chance, pussy. You chose not to. Now, it's different if you were physically unable to. You get a pass from me. But if you had the opportunity to serve and you deliberately chose not to, you never are able to walk away from that. And you can tell when you deal with people. You can tell this guy's never done anything. This guy's never been in the service. Look at this guy. The way he talks, the way he acts, the way he complains. Nobody in the military does that. Nobody that's ever served, you have a slightly different attitude. You could say the whole world is screwed, but you're doing it from the perspective of somebody who's been and seen things and put up with difficulty and dealt with challenges that you didn't have any control over. And these guys, they have no experience with those kinds of things.
What was one of the most, if you are okay sharing, if not, it's totally okay. What was one of the most stressful experiences you had while deployed?
I guess one of the things that really got to me was after our mission we were mission complete, and we're all sitting around. Everybody's kind of stressed out, and you're tired, but you can't go to sleep. And you're just sitting around with nothing to do. And two of the guys in the platoon come up to me, and a guy named Corporal Harris at the time. I was sergeant. And I think an E4 and an E3 come up to me and said, hey, Sergeant, Sergeant so-and-so says he hates niggers. Sergeant Harris was, or Corporal Harris, was 6'1", looked like a bodybuilder, big black guy from Alabama. His wife is English, beautiful blonde-haired woman. And he and I got along fine. I liked him a lot. And, my platoon sergeant's doing this. And I threatened, I told them, I said, I'll tell you what, you go tell so-and-so that if we hear any more about it, we're going to beat his ass in the middle of the night. I don't want to hear any more about that crap. We got too much going on. And we have just come through a difficult situation. Now is not the time to be letting your prejudices out. If you're that stressed out, then you need to go somewhere and yell that into a void where nobody else is. And I guess one of the other times was when the first sergeant of the company that my platoon was attached to saw a dead body for the first time, and he broke down and started crying like a baby. And I'm just kind of, you're a first sergeant. You've been in the Army 20 years, maybe, close to that. And you're an infantry non-commissioned officer. And you've never been hunting in your life, apparently. Never had to gut an animal after you shot it. And, the smells, the sights, the sounds. He sees a dead guy and he just completely falls apart. And that worried me. That was pretty stressful. Because if things had gotten worse, this calls into question a whole lot more than just him breaking down. Now you've got the discipline and morale of the whole company to be concerned with, and it's just like, man, this is the last thing I want to see. And, there were little incidents like that we encountered. But, overall, the whole experience, not just, those moments, but the whole 7.5, 8 month deployment, that was something concerning. But one thing that was a bright point for me, at least, was General McCaffrey was commander of the 24th Infantry Division. And I knew a little bit about him. He was a Vietnam vet. He had horribly wounded. One of his arms is just a big mass of scar tissue, and he can't really use his hand that well. He's a retired 4-star now. And he was a 2-star at the time. And I knew that we would be okay. I knew it. Deep down inside, I knew. He won a Distinguished Service Cross twice in Vietnam as a platoon leader. And you don't do that kind of thing without having the dedication to doing the job that he did. And he was able to stay on active duty and retire. And he was a hard man to deal with sometimes, from what I understand. But I had no doubt if we were going to do a frontal assault on the gates of hell, we would have made it because of his leadership. And we had a good battalion commander, good company commander. You know, our company XO was a ex-Navy SEAL. So, you know, everybody was, you know, happy that he was there. And, you know, and it all went off okay. You know, in the end, you know, we all came back home. There were probably some people that got scuffed up a little bit, but nobody got shot and killed, which was good. That would have been hard for anybody to deal with, because I was the newest guy. I was one of the newest guys in the battalion when I got there. I had just come from Korea, and I signed into 2nd Battalion, 18th Infantry, Alpha Company, and everybody's pulling out all these desert uniforms. I said, "Are we going to the national training? Are we going to NTC? We're going to do that?" And no, we were going to war. And some of these guys had served together for 4 and 5 years. And if one of them or some of them had been hurt or killed, that would have been devastating for their buddies. You know, so it's a good thing that didn't happen. But, you know, when people deploy to Afghanistan, like my oldest son did, you know, he told me some stories. You know, one time as squad leader, he would go and interface with village elders. And he was told to go do that and find out what they need, what we can do to help them. And he comes back and says, well, they say they need a well. They don't have any water in the immediate area. They need a well. Okay. You know, and then we'll tell you, you know, when you can go back and talk to them, you know, we'll tell you what we were able to do. And they call him back and they said, okay, you know, I don't know how much time transpired, but he goes to the CP, I'm assuming. They say, okay, he needs you to go back and talk to the guy and tell him, congratulate him on the new road he's getting. His new road. You can't drink a road. You know, and he basically told him, I'm not doing it. He refused to do it. And you know, say what you want about religious freedom, Islam is bad. Anybody wants to argue that point? You tell me why those men marry little 8, 9-year-old girls. You tell me why they beat women, treat them like dogs. You tell me why an imam would say something as ridiculous as a woman's period causes earthquakes. I've seen the video. You know, you tell me why they have a little boy that goes around with the Afghan National Forces and he's their sex toy. Tell me there's nothing wrong with this. There's everything wrong with it. And, you know, it should be completely eliminated from this country. I know we have we want to have religious freedom. I understand that. But when those people that choose to follow Islam have enough numbers, you can see this going on in New York already and in Texas. They start becoming very belligerent. You know, there's a large group of them and there's a couple of you, and they want to come over there and they want to fight. They want to tear you up. And they're going to do it. And then what are you going to do? You know, the only solution you have is to either not go or you start packing a weapon. And I've got weapons. I've got several, but it's not something I carry around with me, because I'm worried. I don't want to live in a place where you got to be worried like that. Then you talk about places like Chicago. Like 30 people last weekend got shot. There's more people getting killed doing that than Americans getting killed in this conflict we've got going on with Iran right now. So there's a lot of crap going on, and this one thing just kind of rolls into another and into another. So kind of keeps you, especially when I'm looking at this, it kind of keeps you on edge. You don't want to find a situation like that you have to deal with. You're prepared to deal with it in sort of a unique way, but don't want to have to do it.
Well, I want to thank you for your time.
I appreciate you offering, man. I'm happy to do this.
Yeah. As we close out here, did you want to leave the audience listening at home with anything specifically about? I mean, since we did kind of hit on that heavy this episode.
Yeah. The biggest thing for guys that are veterans, if you're kind of in a situation like I was, if you're sort of aimless, you don't know, you have a hard time with everything, turn your life over to Christ. You may, I don't need all that. You'd be surprised just how much you do need it. Give it a try. There's an analogy that people have made, guy says he doesn't believe in God, God's not there. It's okay. A believer says, okay, what about this? If I'd live as a Christian and I do my best, of course I'm not perfect, I fail all the time, but I have God to turn to. If I do all these things and I live this life, and I will have lived a pretty good life, treating people with respect, treat others the way you want to be treated, all these things, forgive people, don't hold a grudge. And I die and God's not there, I've still done pretty good. Now, if you die and God is there and you actively disbelieve, oops, now what you going to do? So you make the choice. The good thing about Christianity is you have the free will to decide for yourself. Unlike Islam, you take on the beliefs of Islam, you try to leave, it's a death penalty. And they're not afraid to tell you that. You don't hear Christians walking around talking about killing people just because, or beating people, or beheading people because they believe something different. This is, I think unfortunately before I die, if I die a natural death, we're going to be at war with Islam. And that's not going to be a good thing. I hope that doesn't happen. But that's something that I worry about. But anyway, Jesus is the way. It's not something that you need to be profound and tell everybody, and you got to do that as you feel the need to do it, but it's a lot more peaceful life. That doesn't mean life's going to be easy. That means that you're willing to accept the test and you're willing to take the challenges because you got somebody to lean on that you may or may not have. And it makes it better. Doesn't make it easier, but it makes it better.
Amen. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time. I know some of that was pretty heavy, hard to talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah, some of it was. It got me a little bit choked up there, but it helps to talk about it. It really does.
Yeah, one of my best friends I was in the Marines with killed himself last summer, and I just really wish I had caught him more often or something.
Yeah, and you don't know what you could have done. You have no idea.
Yeah.
And if you had known, what would you have done? You know, I'd do anything. You know, I would have done anything.
I don't know. I ask myself all the time if there's like, what is it? Because I've been low before, you know, and I always ask myself, what was it that kept me from going all the way or whatever? And,
yeah.
I just wish I could help other people find that key to stick around.
Yeah, that's the hard part, because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to be weak or vulnerable or feel like they're going to, you know, like some of those guys were saying, I was worried about getting locked up. And you don't need to be locked up, but you need help. And you know, you gotta be willing to admit it, and you got to find somebody to talk to. And you know, the veteran crisis line, you know, all the things that have been done to promote a healthier way of dealing with this is all for nothing if you're not willing to take advantage of it.
If you don't use it,
Yeah, and that's still a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, you got to talk to somebody that you can relate to, that can relate to you, and that's really the key to the whole thing, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think the first step is definitely saying just out loud that you're not okay. You know, just saying, I'm not okay right now.
Yeah, I need help.
Yeah.
I need somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
I don't need pills, but I do need some help of some kind.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta grab yourself by the balls and just do this, because the hurt that you leave behind. My son's entire platoon, the two girls that he dated prior to joining the service and the one after the service, his two brothers, his niece and his nephew, his sister-in-law. You know, my youngest son would, you know, he would have fits in the middle of the night, you know, tear up his bed, and it was because he found him, and it was, you know, extremely hard on him. And, you know, it took a long time for him to come to terms with that. And, you know, and my wife too, she still has issues, and it's been 7 years. So, you know, if somebody's thinking about it, dude, you better keep thinking. Keep thinking. Find somebody to talk to. Call somebody. Shit, if you want to call me, my cell phone number is 912-662-2206. Call me. I don't care what time it is. If I hear the phone ringing, I'll pick it up. If I don't recognize the number, I'll call it back, as long as it's not a spam call, and I'll talk to you. Whatever good I can do, I'll do. You know, you're worth more than that. You're worth infinitely more than that. God didn't put you here to destroy yourself. You know, don't think about it like that, like you're no good, you're worthless. You know, I'd be better if I wasn't here. No, that's not true. You're better here. And you're better building a good life here. You know, as difficult as it might be, and you might have to struggle every frickin' day, it's better when you're here. I guess we can close with that, huh? Okay.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Glad to.